In Boots Riley's movie, Sorry to Bother You, the main character is repeatedly told to
stick to the script.
Stick to the script.
But they aren't just talking about a telemarketing script. They're also talking about larger societal scripts. The ones that we follow without even thinking about it. In psychology, behavioral scripts refer to the sequence of actions we unconsciously take in a given social situation. Like when you go to a gas station. You know there's a specific place to park. You get out of your car and approach the teller. You know what to say. You engage in a transaction and fill your vehicle with fuel without even having to think about it, like you're on autopilot. This may seem like a mundane example, but to show how powerful it is, let's look at how even the tiniest change in this script can say a lot about a character. Cash says
40 on 2.
And instead of throwing down $40, he breaks the script by throwing down 40 cents. This does a few things. First, it makes this moment comedic, since it subverts our expectation that he meant $40. Second, it tells us about his desperate financial situation. Not to mention, it gives us a sense of his sardonic personality. Plus, it's super relatable for those of us who grew up without being able to afford to fill our gas tanks. Social scripts are incredibly powerful. And just think how horribly embarrassing it is when you're at a restaurant and your server goes, "Enjoy your food." And instead of saying, "Thanks," you say, "You too." Now imagine that same kind of mistake in a situation that actually matters. When you interview for a job, you basically know what to expect because you've seen this script before. The characters are you playing the part of the interviewee and somebody else playing the part of the manager. You know they're the authority and you have to treat them with respect. You're serving their needs because they probably have all the power in the situation. You know the required wardrobe, so you wear a tie. You know what props to bring, your resume, references, maybe even some awards, and you even rehearse your answers beforehand. But what's interesting about the first scene of Sorry to Bother You is its subtext. Cash is rewarded for lying. His resume and awards are phony. His reference was a fraud, and not even a very good fraud. He's given the job because...
You know what this bootleg trophy tells me? It tells me the only thing I need to know. You have initiative, and you can read.
So, in this moment, initiative comes to mean a willingness to lie to get what you want. It means appearing to follow the script while simultaneously doing whatever you need to get ahead, to close that deal, to make a profit, even if it means lying. So lie to get ahead in capitalism, just don't look like you're lying. By sticking to the script, we aren't sticking to a rigid system of ethics or morality or hard work. We're sticking to an act. An outward appearance of ethics and morality and hard work. We're putting on a little play where we pretend we're the enterprising young person pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, while actually being a bad person who exploits others. Sorry to Bother You contains a lot of text versus subtext moments. One of my favorites is when this manager says,
"Stick to the script,"
and then turns to reveal his Anarchy A tattoo. He projects the text of anarchy, but we know he's actually just a corporate tool.
Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you!
Truly, conservatism is the new punk rock. The most blatant example of text versus subtext is the compliment argument. Cash and Salvador are furious at each other and seconds away from throwing punches. But instead of insults, they're exchanging compliments.
I hope your month is full of successful days and a lot of great ventures. I hope you just come up, brother.
It's such a great scene because it's not only funny, but it's incredibly emotionally honest and true to life. This exact thing actually happened to Boots' brother, and Boots has said in interviews that as soon as he saw it happen, he knew he was going to put it in a movie one day. I think the reason it struck a chord with Boots, and likewise why it strikes a chord with me in the film, is because of the false politeness and civility that dominates many aspects of our lives, especially political discourse, where some people are criticized for being rude or uncivil or shrill, while other people are allowed to be straight up bigots. But it's these subtler moments that end up paying off in the film's climax. For example, before Anarchy Dude says stick to the script, he teases the idea that if Cash does really well, someday he could be promoted to Power Caller.
Eventually, you might even be able to be a power caller.
Not promoted to management, just promoted from one kind of collar to another, higher paid kind of collar. The subtext of saying power collar instead of manager is that the people in charge have already decided that cash will never actually achieve true status or power in the company. Similarly, in the office meeting, we see, on one side, management. On the other side, the collars. All three managers are white, while the collars are diverse. We can tell ourselves that these three white people just happen to be the best at their job, and that's how they got there. But during this pep talk, Anarchy Dude goes off on a rambling, kind of sociopathic rant.
Tagging is when you claim that money is a sale. Cha-ching. Like when they put the tag on the body at the morgue to identify it. That's mine.
And the female executive goes on a similarly meaningless rant about friendship as capital.
I would argue that social currency now is more important, and don't take it from me. Take it from the news. Take it from media, all kinds of media, digital, paper, otherwise. Media's changing. So is capital. Get with it. I don't want to scare you, but it's a new world.
They are not good at their jobs. If the stated textual purpose of management is to tell us how to do our jobs, but management doesn't actually know how to do our jobs any better than we do, then the subtext becomes the managers are managers simply because they are managers. It's the natural order of things. Don't draw attention to the unethical means by which we got here. What the film is pointing out here is the racial scripting that affects our corporate culture. In real life, we see this when people defend a lack of diversity in Silicon Valley by saying that's just the way it is, without acknowledging why it is that way. What script was the company following that got us to this point? Every ad or TV segment in the Sorry to Bother You universe shows us a particular script, an idea of how we should be living. The idea that working for worry-free is so nice and good. We are shown what our place in the worry-free world should be. Just like in real life, every ad shows us societal scripts to follow in order to be successful, or healthy, or a real man, or a sexy lady. All you need is this Peleton treadmill and a room full of windows. It's also worth noting that when we see employees portrayed as happy and hardworking, worry-free casts white or white-passing actors and models, even though the surrounding neighborhood is mostly populated by people of color. But in this example, where the ad is implying that the character is lazy, alcoholic, and needs to turn their life around, they are portrayed as a black father, reflecting the racially coded values of real-life advertisements and media. But who gets to write these behavioral scripts? Who decides which roles we play or which roles are even available? Usually it's rich people. Sometimes they're able to consciously manipulate the script, like how we don't use the word waiter anymore, really. Instead, some random executive somewhere decided we'd start using the word server, which corporations love because they want us to see employees as servants, as beneath the customer, as simply cogs in a much larger machine. Sometimes they try and fail, like when a billionaire says we shouldn't use the word billionaire anymore. Instead, we should use the term
people of means.
Because we certainly don't want to draw attention to the unethical means by which a people becomes a billionaire. But when you stop and think about it, pretty much every interaction in our lives, every relationship follows some kind of template. Just think about what it means to be a mother or an employee or an American. Each of these categories can be used to subtly imply gender or education or ethnicity or certain responsibilities, even though you could argue that each of those terms are neutral. And each of those categories are used by companies to market products to you. Just like how America sells Americanism to people by saying that we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and yet slavery was and still is legally permitted by the US Constitution. So many of our concepts of freedom and independence are these fill-in-the-blank statements that we don't take time to think about. Even our most basic understanding of freedom is highly scripted. Lots of interviews with Boots and the cast frame white voice as simply a voice that you can turn on and off instead of a deeper systematic problem.
I'll ask this question in my white voice.
So let's talk about white voice and how it operates. As Danny Glover's character explains, white voice is more than just a tone.
Well, you don't talk white enough. I'm not talking about Will Smith's wife. That ain't white, that's just proper. I'm talking about the real deal. Brady Bunch. I don't really need this money. You've never been fired. Only laid off. It's what they wish they sounded like. So it's like what they think they're supposed to sound like.
Glover's character is describing the act of code switching. Here's tech CEO and founder of People of Color in Tech, Chandra Arthur, explaining the term.
Code switching as a concept is really interesting. By definition, it's what happens when people who speak multiple languages alternate between two or more, oftentimes within the same phrase or sentence. In a more colloquial sense, code switching is what happens when people reflexively or subtly change the way they express themselves.
People switch codes all the time. You could argue that means that when we switch codes, we lose authenticity, or that code switching is inherently bad. But as Lakeith Stanfield elaborates,
Code switching is something that we all do to survive in many forms and fashions, and I think the white voice here could be representative of a lot of different things, not simply just a voice in the way that it sounds over the phone, but how we make ourselves look to others, how we dress ourselves up in pretty little things, and things we do to make ourselves more palatable, particularly in the workplace. And I think everyone is involved in that game to one level or another. So I think it's a universal theme, and so I really tried to pay less attention to the implications behind it, more attention to just the idea and the ambition that the character was experiencing and trying to bring about change in his life by any means necessary, thereby sometimes through that overlooking sometimes friends and family and loved ones in the process.
On top of that, Boots Riley explains,
There's no true performance of self, because culture is actually just whatever people do to survive. Should there be a different world in which you're not trying to escape racist assumptions by switching up how you talk? I wish it was that. It's also making a comment on what that code is that we're switching, that there's an idea of not just blackness, but that whiteness is an idea in and of itself, that whiteness is this thing that is performed.
The story of how Boots Riley came to write and direct Sorry to Bother You is a long one. From working as a telemarketer himself, to getting the script published in McSweeney's in 2014 because he couldn't get the movie made, to going through the Sundance labs to develop his vision. But you wouldn't know that from watching the CBS This Morning interview with Boots. They tried to rewrite what happened to fit their pro-capitalist template. CBS This Morning favors a very simple, easy to digest, pro-capitalist message. A rags to riches fairy tale. Boots was once a telemarketer himself, which is what inspired the movie.
It started because you were a telemarketer years ago.
And he worked hard, and now he's successful because he never gave up.
Boots Riley didn't give up, and it's paying off.
Clearly the movie is inspired by way more than just Boots had a job and wrote a movie about it, and they gloss over its discussion of racial politics, class struggle, unionizing, and its anti-capitalist message. Just look at the quote they pulled to describe the movie.
The film is visually ingenious and funny, yet grounded by pointed arguments about the obstacles to black success in America.
If this quote had any less substance, it'd be vapor. What CBS This Morning is doing here is the multimedia version of white voice. Hollywood is a slog. People in power love to frame every success as an overnight success, erasing the nepotism, the daily grind, and the years of just trying to figure out what your own voice is as a filmmaker. CBS This Morning tries to slap a sunny, happy, everything will work out if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps message on Sorry to Bother You. Pay no attention to the system that actually discourages women and people of color and queer people from getting their scripts in the spotlight. But the message and the visuals in the movie are so strong, these hosts end up coming off as out of touch. And I think watching the movie quickly erases those silly misconceptions. Tying this mass media version of white voice back to the importance of representation, here's Terry Crews.
I always looked at it as being bilingual, just simply because I remember being a kid and going over my white friends' houses, and I knew how they lived already, simply because everything was white. The media, the TV shows, I watched the Brady Bunch. I knew what it was like. But then when they come over my house, they didn't understand what we were saying. They had no clue. And they would tell me, what did that mean? What's that? You get 50 million questions from your white friends when they come to your house, and you realize, oh, they don't know what I'm talking about. I have to speak your language. But there was a lot of times there was a total unwillingness for them to learn mine.
The very foundation of our culture and our media is racist. We're a country founded on slavery, which is the theft and exploitation of labor. So, of course, anything we build on top of that foundation runs the risk of inherently favoring racism, sometimes in obvious ways and sometimes in really subtle ways. Social scripts are not written in a vacuum. Not all scripts treat everyone equally. We need to be more aware of whose scripts get shuffled to the top and which ones get left behind. And by we, I mostly mean white people like me, who grew up watching white people be all white on TV and didn't even have to consider that there were alternatives. In her essay, The Oppositional Gaze, Bell Hooks wrote, "When most black people in the United States first had the opportunity to look at film and television, they did so fully aware that mass media was a system of knowledge and power, reproducing and maintaining white supremacy. To stare at the television or mainstream movies, to engage its image, was to engage its negation of black representation. Throughout the history of Hollywood, we've seen white scripts, in a very literal manner, given priority over other scripts. And just as literal TV and movie scripts get shuffled to the top of the pile, the behavioral scripts we follow in everyday life are often racially coded, discriminatory, or otherwise hierarchical." Thinking back to the behavioral script where I said the wrong thing to my waiter and felt embarrassed, that's probably the worst thing that's likely to happen to me, a white person, in a restaurant in the 21st century. But white people get to conveniently forget the fact that up into the middle of the 20th century, the American social script said that if your skin wasn't white, you couldn't even step inside certain restaurants. And if you did, the result wasn't just embarrassment, but harassment and violence. Sorry to Bother You specifically ties the racist history of labor exploitation to tech companies. Tech companies try to sell us on the idea that they're going to lead some kind of utopian society where everyone is equal. But since these companies are built on a foundation of societal racism, the results are often discriminatory. Redlining is one example of that foundational racism. The red line refers to a boundary drawn around certain neighborhoods where white people refuse to sell services such as insurance, bank loans, or healthcare to black residents. It is illegal and has been illegal for decades thanks to various laws like the Fair Housing Act of 1968 and the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977. But companies like Facebook have allowed advertisers to refuse to sell services to black people and other marginalized groups by selecting specific demographics. Even after repeated complaints, and even after Facebook said they'd fix that issue. Facebook's response to this and other issues follows this script. "We're sorry, we made a boo-boo, but we promise we are working to change." Just look at this clip from Frontline, which shows their response to the accusation that they didn't do enough to stop bad actors from meddling in the 2016 election.
"We could have done more sooner, and we haven't been as fast as we needed to be."
That line was repeated by all the current officials Facebook put forward to answer questions.
We've been too slow to act on.
I think we were too slow.
We didn't see it fast enough. We were too slow.
Mark has said this, that we have been slow.
One of my greatest regrets in running the company is that we were slow in identifying the Russian information operations in 2016.
And stories about tech companies exploiting labor for little or no money are too numerous to count. As cultural critic Charles Mudede writes, "Technological progress has not freed labor from exploitation, but intensified it." Tech companies don't just make life more efficient, they make discrimination more efficient. These companies want to lead us into the future, but they perpetuate the exact same biased scripts that we've seen over and over throughout America's past. Not convinced that tech companies want to influence our social scripts? Just open an email and start typing. "Oh, what's this? Words magically appear suggesting what I should type? What if Google decides to autocorrect the word billionaire to people of means? What if I prefer they/them pronouns, but Google decides it's easier for their advertisers to target me if it forces me to use she or her? What if I type the word racism and it suggests the change to unconventional thoughts on ethnic inclusion? These hypotheticals may seem wild or extreme, but when language is filtered through these companies, we get headlines like this. A police officer is under investigation after a dispute with his wife early Saturday resulted in a handgun being discharged and her being shot. Gee, I wonder what happened. Steve Lift exemplifies this false egalitarian tech bro attitude.
We're transforming life itself. We're saving the economy. I mean, we're saving lives.
Racists justify their racism by using pseudoscience to claim that certain people are biologically inferior to others. When we look at the history of slavery in the US, we see a history of white men arguing that black people are categorically other species. Just like in the scene earlier, where management is management simply by virtue of that fact being true, not by the virtue of being any better at their job, racists argue that the superiority of white people is simply true because they see it as true. Steve Lift's plan to turn workers into equisapiens is an example of that racist pseudoscience, played out in the most literal, horrifying way possible. His goal is to take his racist, unnatural script and project it over reality, to literally mutate people's DNA to justify slavery. As part of his social script, Steve Lift tries to cast Cash as his Martin Luther King Jr. character, so that he can continue to provide the text of the script, spoken out of the mouth of a working class black person. It's fitting that Steve Lift specifically says he wants Cash to become a Martin Luther King Jr. figure. Dr. King introduced a lot of phrases into the broader American script. Neoliberals and right-wingers in the United States know very well that it's almost impossible to erase phrases and ideas from popular memory. So instead, they try to distort ideas, trying to recode revolutionary ideas as ineffective, centrist slogans, and recuperate radical speech into meaningless, feel-good self-help advice. And this whole time, there's someone else who's been using white voice in a very unexpected way. Mr. Blank, the power caller who oversees Cash. Look at the way that Mr. Blank kneels, and the camera looks down at him, making it feel like Cash is the only one with power in this dynamic. But in the reverse shot, we are still looking down at Cash slightly. These shots tell us that there's a larger power dynamic at play. And soon after that, in this scene, guess who we see looking down at Cash, and by extension, looking down at us. Listen to Mr. Blank's soothing voice, his carefree attitude.
Look here, young blood, we don't cry about the shit that should be. We just thrive in what is, and what is opportunity.
He is selling Cash on a fantasy, which we soon learn is actually a nightmare. What Sorry to Bother You does that really sets it apart, though, is that it gives us an alternative, instead of just saying thing bad. It shows us how to organize, how to maintain solidarity, and it shows how brutal strikebusters can be. Rich people have done a really good job of erasing the history of the labor movement from classrooms and from media. Recently, we saw the power of workers withholding labor in real life. It wasn't Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer who ended the government shutdown in early 2019. It was workers threatening to strike. It was collective action by people who have something that the government and corporations need more than anything else: labor. We need to look for alternative scripts that we can use to improve everyone's lives moving forward, instead of just choosing scripts that slightly increase the bank accounts of a billionaire, who I refuse to refer to as people of means. New scripts can be scary. Just look at the horror the idea of a Green New Deal strikes in the heart of Tucker Carlson. That's the true power of a progressive script. It can scare rich people. Well, that's actually a side effect. The real power is that we can be more inclusive with the scripts that we follow. And that's one thing I really love about the portrayal of the equisapiens. They're not derided with ableist language for being physically distinct. They're portrayed as just regular folks trapped in the same system as everyone else.
We are honored to be in your presence.
Dude, I'm from East Oakland.
Talk regular.
And the Equisapiens and the unionizers all work together. Sorry to Bother You is also a meta-commentary on another type of script, the Hollywood 3-act structure. It does follow the plot points of the 3-act structure, but it challenges the values of the traditionally pro-capitalist, materialist, authority-appeasing 3-act structure. When you're writing a movie in LA, it's basically the only format you're allowed to follow. And it's a format that inherently places a single main character into a narrative where they must overcome unbeatable odds to save the world, or save a loved one, or to save oneself. Whatever the concrete or metaphorical objective is. Usually this character takes on the characteristics of some Christ-like messiah figure bringing a message of hope. In describing hopeful films like these, Charles Mudede writes, "The awful world that is only needs to see the light." These fictional worlds are simply in need of their own Martin Luther King Jr., just like how the real Martin Luther King Jr. ended racism forever, according to white liberals and conservatives. Sorry to Bother You places Cash in a situation where he feels like he's the lone hero, fighting for what he thinks is right. But we're conscious of the fact that most of the choices he makes are questionable, or downright bad. They're the kind of choices that we publicly swear we never make, yet people make all the time. His selfishness is frighteningly relatable, especially since so much of the messaging in our culture encourages us to screw over our peers in order to get ahead. And for all we know, in the world of Sorry to Bother You, there's dozens or hundreds or thousands more Cassius Greens around the country or around the world being made to feel special in exchange for selling out. This parallels our experience as individuals when we watch a movie. We're meant to identify with the main character and involve ourselves emotionally with their journey. You identify with the hero. You don't identify with a random stranger in the crowd, even when you're sitting in a movie theater where you are a random stranger in a crowd. Movies are tightly constructed to make us feel like we're along for the ride, to make us feel that we're suffering, growing, and winning alongside the main character. We are told, you are just like the main character and you can change the world all by yourself.
You are awesome.
These narratives usually try to sell us on some kind of larger theme or value system. Or sometimes just to cynically sell us a specific product through in-story product placement.
What?
Sorry to Bother You shows us how that experience is entirely artificial and how dangerous it can be when we buy into a messiah narrative without question. You could end up an Equisapien. While making this video, I also sat down with a couple of awesome friends to get their perspective on Sorry to Bother You. You may recognize Zora from our time together at Cracked. He talked about how some movies simplify the problem of racism, and how other films, like Sorry to Bother You and Blindspotting, get more to the heart of the issue.
If you're talking about scripts with certain films fitting a script of conversation of, oh, this is a film that is about two races not really knowing each other and figuring out how to get along while being in a car together, you know? And sort of this feel-good thing of like, all we gotta do is just to be able to listen to each other and get to know each other, which is like a small part of it. I've gotten to know a lot of people, yet there are still people being murdered without, you know, punishment. I think Sorry to Bother You maybe sort of went off script in that way of it wasn't just a movie about race, it was a movie about class, about capitalism. It didn't fit in that box of, oh, this is this sort of token movie that we can make a script, or sorry, an Oscar nominee for Best Picture and say, oh, well, we have this kind of movie, this is Black Klansman. And in the same way, I think Blindspotting sort of went off script in that way where you can't say, oh, it's a movie just about gentrification, it's a movie just about police violence. Why do we have a race problem in this country? Like, where does it come from? Like, where does this stem from? Is it really about us getting to know each other on the road in a car? No. It's much larger than that. Yeah. It's about just certain people having resources and being able to control those resources and using a system to which these people can keep this and these people don't. And that's what the use of race and racism has always been in this country. It's always come down to self-interest, self-preservation, resources, power.
Director and producer Cody Ziglar talked about how even the physical means of production in filmmaking have a racially biased history.
If you go back and read any interviews with like cinematographers or even photographers like not married in filmmaking, is like, yeah, they would have, I think it was called, I may be wrong, but Betty charts, you'd use that to measure skin tone. But that was like was a white lady in like the 50s, and like photographers were being like, oh, we have this problem where like we can't photograph dark skin, or like I can't color correct dark skin to this chart because like the way that the institution was built and to serve this one particular skin tone, which was a white skin tone. And that was the same way with film. It's like it was very difficult to shoot dark skin. But like I think one thing that's alleviated that is just digital filmmaking. I think that's one. It's obviously digital is cheaper to just go rent an Alexa for a weekend. But also like you have like all this dynamic range and all these different color tones, and like you can get different looking skin. These are all symptoms of being sourced from a very specific crowd that doesn't necessarily have the same experiences or point of view or expectations or life experiences as like people that aren't straight white people.
In a few weeks, I'm going to put out extended interviews with them. You'll hear more of their insights on Sorry to Bother You, their experiences as filmmakers in Hollywood in 2019, plus they'll recommend other movies that you should definitely check out. I want to give a big thank you to all of my patrons who waited very patiently for this video. I could not have made these videos without your support. And I'm going to be making some more film analysis videos more often. This is usually the part of the video where I ask for your support on Patreon. You can find the info below, but I also want to encourage you to check out Zora and Cody's work. You can find their links below too. Bye!